Hi guys, Nick Jennison for Guitar Interactive, and on the test bench today, we're taking a look at the DM-206 from our friends at Aria Pro II. Now this guitar is essentially a modernized reproduction of the Univox High Flyer guitar, which was made in the 1970s by Aria for Univox and sold in Japan under the Aria brand. And perhaps its most famous user is of course Kurt Cobain from Nirvana, but it does bear a striking resemblance to the Mosrite Ventures signature guitar, and apparently that is very much by design. Now, like I say, this guitar is a modernized reproduction of a vintage instrument, so some of those quirks that make vintage guitars a little unreliable and perhaps a little unwieldy have been very much ironed out, but this guitar does definitely keep the spirit of the original, especially with these two mini humbuckers, which we'll explore in full in just a moment. Now, in the intro, you heard me playing this guitar with a little bit of dirt and a bit of delay through a Victory V4 Countess preamp, now known as the Jack preamp, into our Super Kraken. Let's try a clean sound. I'm going to throw a bit of trem on just for some vibe. We will explore this guitar with a more unmolested clean tone in just a minute, but let's hear how well this instrument deals with a cleaner kind of tone. So now we've heard this guitar both clean and with a little bit of dirt, let's talk a little bit about the specifications and then we'll do a full tour of the sounds that are on board. So let's start up here at the headstock, and what you can see is we have a whole lot of headstock real estate going on. It's a very, very big vintage style headstock with this really cool Aria Pro II logo. I'm a big fan of that, and I think they should use this perhaps on more of their guitars. I think it looks really rather interesting. As we turn things over, you can see we've got 6 button style tuners with these kind of plastic buttons and these kind of enclosed Clusen type housings. Very, very cool. The neck itself is finished. It's a finished piece of maple with a rosewood fingerboard, and we have 21 frets. Now, I personally would have quite liked to have seen 22, but I understand that this is a vintage style guitar. Some people don't get all the way up in the dusty end when you're playing this type of instrument, so maybe that's just me. One thing that I am super pleased to see again on Aria's guitar, they've done this in a few guitars that I've reviewed, and I always like to see it, is this truss rod adjustment wheel right here, which means you don't have to take a cover off to adjust your truss rod. Now, I should say that this particular guitar arrived with an absolutely stunning factory setup. It was, if I remember rightly, it was 3/64ths on the high E and then 2/32 action on the low E, which is absolutely banging straight out of the factory. And of course, there was no buzz or any rattle anywhere to speak of. Normally, I do tend to give guitars a quick setup before I review them. Not necessary on this one. Very, very cool indeed. But if I had needed to adjust it, could have done so with this little wheel down here. Now, on neck joint, you'll see over here, it's a 4-bolt design, and it's a really nice carved away heel, so it doesn't get in your way when you're getting all the way up there into the dusty end. There's no cavities on the back to speak of because we've got a pick guard housing all of the electronics. And then you'll notice we have these 2 mini humbuckers, which we'll explore in full in a moment. Now, these mini humbuckers, one of them is slanted, one of them is straight, you can see down there, and of course we have this angled end on the neck. Now, I don't think this has any real effect on the tone. I think it's more of an aesthetic choice, but it certainly looks very cool. And then down here, as far as controls are concerned, we have a single 3-way toggle, master volume, master tone. There's no push-pulls, nothing fancy. You just get these 3 sounds, but they all sound killer and they're full of character. Now, one small criticism I want to make of this one, and this is not something that Aria have done by design. This is just the way these old guitars were made, but these 2 knobs are quite close together, and if you have large hands like me, it can be quite challenging to get your hand through and swipe the volume control all the way off in a live situation. But again, that's just the nature of the beast when you're dealing with guitars of this this style, and I suppose it makes more sense to keep the aesthetic just right rather than worry too much about accommodating large-handed individuals like myself. And one final point, we have this front-mounted jack socket on there, which again is kind of vintage correct. It's what you'd expect to see on this type of instrument. It also keeps the routing down. It means we don't have to drill a hole to get the jack socket down here, where it would normally be on this corner. And that keeps the body nice and thin too, because we have this lovely edge contour which wouldn't be thick enough to accommodate a jack socket. So we've taken a little bit of a look at the specifications. Let's do some tones next, and we're going to explore the 3 pickup settings. Remember, there are only 3 because we have no push pulls or splits or anything like that. We're going to explore them clean and with a little bit of dirt. Let's start with the cleanest of clean sounds. We're going to go back to our Victory V4 Countess preamp on the clean channel with the gain dialed way back. It's going to be a super sparkly clean. We'll start with the bridge, we'll go to the middle and then to the neck position. Let's take a listen. So what should be apparent from that little pickup tour, and also from the 2 playing demos at the start of this review, is that these 2 pickups, while they are humbuckers, they don't really sound like humbuckers in the traditional sense. And this should come as no surprise to anyone who's familiar with mini humbuckers, because they really don't sound like PAFs or like modern thick fat humbucker pickups. If anything, they're closer to a Telecaster type sound, or maybe a brighter P90, but of course without the hum. And these pickups in particular are a really great representation of this particular pickup type. And there's a superb bounce in the mid-range that I really love, especially with a bit of gain. In fact, we're going to explore that now. So let's do another pickup tour. Let's throw a bit of gain on our Super Kraken, and we'll hear how well these pickups retain their character with a little bit of saturation. So hopefully what you can hear from that demonstration is that these pickups again have this fantastic bouncy, clangy mid-range, and because the low end is quite tucked and it's a little less pronounced than you'd expect on a humbucker set, you get this really tight, wiry kind of delivery that is great in a mix, and it sits fantastically in a band setting. But because there's no hum, you can use this type of sound with a ton of gain without experiencing that awful kind of live thing where your guitar's just kind of howling away to itself and buzzing uncontrollably. Definitely not going to be the case with this instrument. So now we've heard it clean and dirty in kind of a clinical kind of setting, let's explore some more situational type playing examples. And we're going to kick off with a little bit of slide. Now for this, we're going to go to the middle pickup setting, which is both pickups on, and this kind of hollow type sound is really great for haunting slide lines. We're going to go to the Super Kraken's clean channel, cranked up with the preamp focus engaged, and quite a bit of plate reverb. It's going to sound something like this. So given this guitar's pedigree as a grunge riffing machine, we'd be remiss not to try an example with some thick, fat fuzz. So let's go over to the amp's clean channel, we're going to go to the bridge pickup, and we're going to throw on a super thick muff style fuzz. Should sound pretty interesting, especially with these wiry mini humbuckers. Let's try that now. So even under a huge blanket of fuzz, this guitar retains loads of character, and that is primarily down to these mini humbuckers with their great mid-range growl and tucked, subdued low end. Really, really articulate sounding pickups, which are great with a ton of gain, and in actual fact, they work surprisingly well in a metal context. To that end, let's throw on a ton of saturation on a Super Kraken. We're going to tune down as far as the strings will allow us. It comes set up with 10s, so we can't go too low, and we're going to explore some aggressive riffs, and we'll see how well this guitar deals with that kind of playing. So while you might not necessarily think of this guitar as a metal instrument first and foremost, it actually handles that type of playing really rather well, and I think that's down to the articulate nature of these mini humbuckers. Now, they might not be as smooth and refined sounding as you'd want for certain modern metal styles, but there's definitely a really cool, wiry, articulate, aggressive voice in there if you so desire. So there you go, guys. This has been the Aria DM-206. It's a surprisingly versatile guitar given its vintage aesthetic. It plays fantastically well, it balances well, it's pretty light, and if this aesthetic is your bag, I think it looks absolutely gorgeous. But that's probably just me, I'm into this sort of thing, but maybe you are too. One more time, this has been the Aria DM-206. My name is Nick Jennison for Guitar Interactive Magazine. I'll see you next time.